What's going on, everyone? I think it's about that time here, as you can see below me, for some MLS Power Rankings, our first edition of the show. I'm really excited to get this series started. I think it's just about the perfect time here with the start of May, basically. And most of these teams have played around 10 or 11 games, which is basically a third of their season, 34 total games. So they've gone through that. We've gone through this first third of the season, and this middle stretch is really going to be crucial for all of these teams. We've learned a lot about these teams, what they are, what they aren't, and yeah, so that next stretch is going to be crucial. We're going to find out, who's really challenging for that supporter shield down the road. Who can recover from some bad starts, maybe who's for real, who's not, and who's going to be contending for those last playoff spots. So I'm really excited to get this series started once again, and yeah, we're going to work our way up from the bottom here, see, from worst to best. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So the first section is called No Direction. And just a quick note, I have my minuses and pluses based on power rankings I made basically at the start of April, so about a month ago. So I'm kind of including those, transitions from my previous ones. I didn't post a video on that, obviously, but just including that from where I just personally had them about a month ago. So, but anyways, let's just get right into this first section. No direction. And yeah, that includes Dallas, San Jose, the Fire, and New England in that order. So Dallas is at the bottom of the entire league for me, uh, just because of recent events. I mean, they got a win against Dynamo the other week, but still they're second worst in the West, only above San Jose. But they just lost to Toronto on the road. Only, 2 wins on the season. They've only scored 10 goals this year, which is third worst in the entire league, only behind Dynamo and New England. But their recent run of form hasn't been as good as these other teams, I would say. They had 2 draws in the last 5, but both those were 0-0s. Granted, they were against pretty decent teams, but still, they're not scoring, and that's obviously not going to help you. Their defense honestly isn't bad at all. Only 15 conceded, but still, if you can't score, it's if your defense isn't as elite as your as bad as your scoring is, then you're not gonna get many points in this league. Just look at Houston for an example, which has 9 goals only, which is below Dallas, but they've only conceded 10, so that's why they're a little higher in the West. Um, but yeah, this offense has just looked abysmal. Musa, Ferreira haven't been clicking. Ferreira was injured for a long stretch there. He just came back, I think, in the Open Cup game, so he's gotten some minutes under him. So hopefully he stays healthy for them. But still, this team just has too many injuries. At least for this season, the outlook is just not good. I don't see them making the playoffs. But you never know. I mean, they could. I just the West is definitely as a whole just worse this year than the East, so there could be room for a late push. But this roster is just too banged up right now. You can't trust Ferreira to stay healthy, and so that's why I have them at the bottom of the league, just dropping under these couple teams just because of their recent form. Next we have San Jose, who not much needs to be talked about with them. Most goals conceded this year, 26. They just got a big win over LAFC in that game at Levi Stadium. So that gives them a little boost here above Dallas. I just like their roster more a little bit in terms of their attack. I think at least they can, score. And, if they tighten up things on the defensive end, if their goalie, kind of just plays averagely, then this team could get some more points here in this middle stretch. But the defense right now is just too bad. And in this type of section, really, I'm not gonna go too much deep into like why one's above the other right now, but all these teams are pretty bad. And yeah, next going on to my Fire, yeah, they dropped 4 spots for me, scoreless in 4 straight games. 3 of those being their last recent home games, including two losses. One to the Revs, who are still bottom of the East. And yeah, that's just not a good look for them. This offense was supposed to be better with Kuipers, but they still don't have that chance creator at all. And yeah, it's becoming a real problem here. They're only 3 points above the Revs now, last third to last in the East, and it's looking like another prey to make the play-in spots, and that the management is okay with that. We've seen personally from my experience, it's just been very obvious that there is no clear project here, and they're completely fine with not building a winnable roster. So yeah, but the Revs are above them here. That's a big win for them. A little confidence booster on the road. They held a clean sheet, obviously, as well. So yeah, they move up 3 spots for me. I think they were worse in the league about a month ago. I mean, they're still worse in the East, still tied for least points, but they have a good enough roster to kind of some star power there to kind of just edge these other teams. And but I still don't see them in this stacked East like this making the playoff spots. So all the 3 teams in this next section, I say, are really fun watches. If you're neutral, if you just want to put on one of their games, because usually they've had some bangers and some back and forth games. But if you're a fan of these teams, it's probably a really stressful watch. And yeah, it's just a head case. I'm concerned for your health. But yeah, starting with Kansas City. Wow, what a drop off! I had them up 12 spots, a month ago. They started off decently. I think this was like right after they beat Toronto on the road. They were looking decent. They were undefeated on the road, and then I think they played Timbers. Was the start of this like kind of trend here where they've just been collapsing these leads late, and dropping points from winning positions. It's just been a pathetic like run of form here. Um, yeah, only 2 points in the last 5 games. Choked 3-0 to Timbers. Uh, Collapsed late against Miami. Choked to St. Louis. Only got a point in that derby. They lost 2-1 on the road to Minnesota, and then they were scoreless against Real Salt Lake. So yeah, just not picking up points at all here. This team is really aging. I like their attack a bit, because they've been scoring goals, even though their numbers don't say that they're producing much. But definitely not what you'd expect, I guess, defensively from them, and especially at home. I mean, they've been scoring, but it's just somewhat of a mental block here for them. And moving on to 24, the Timbers, more of the same, honestly. Um, Only winless in their last 5. They got 3 straight draws before 2 L's in their last 2 games, where they came back against Kansas City, a tie against LAFC at home, a pretty impressive tie, I will say, against the Crew, even though they were kind of rotating there. Um, but yeah, they lost to LAFC in that rematch, and then they got shut out on the road to Charlotte. So after a pretty decent start to the season, uh, they've dropped a lot of points against decent teams. So a couple impressive draws, I would say, but still they have to start winning games. I think I mentioned in another video, they're the only team to score 2 or more in 5 straight games and not get a win in any of those games. So honestly, even though their numbers haven't been so good on the offensive end, they have a lot of good DPs. They have star power to score, and they have been. It's just been back and forth games, like this section suggests, and they need to really clean it up. But I do believe in them to just get results through their offense. I think they still have another gear to kind of click through. But yeah, just not a good run of form now, and they need a really impressive middle part of the season to get back into these playoff spots. And it starts with the Cascadia Derby upcoming this weekend. And moving on to Orlando City, they're just above both these teams. I think even though they have less points than both of these teams, the East is way stronger this year. They had a 3, pretty impressive results before these 2 losses. They tied to Red Bulls. They went on the road against DC, which is not an easy task, and then they came back to tie against Montreal on the road. But their last 2 losses were at home, and they just got shut out by Cincy. So also just not looking good. Honestly, I really expected more from this defense compared to these other two teams. They have some real problems at the back, and the problem is just that I just don't agree with starting Muriel. But the problem is that they paid him, and Maguire is obviously the better striker to me. But they have to kind of rotate, and Pareja has been kind of rotating these lineups, two strikers sometimes, and or just rotating between those strikers. And I just don't think there's a lot of balance right now between the team. And even though they've kept a lot of their guys, I just feel like I don't know, something's been missing. But we'll see if they could turn it around. So this next group of teams, I would say, have been really inconsistent, and just kind of in the middle of the pack. But they definitely haven't had as bad of starts as the teams below them. And they're kind of all just hanging around these last couple playoff spots in each of their, in each of their conferences. So starting with Montreal, they had that huge, long road trip to start the year, and they really got more points than probably most people expected out of that with their new coach. And I think most of these players have bought into the system in place, and they have a lot of depth. Um, but yeah, they aren't that great defensively. They've let in the most goals in the East with 20. They have the worst expected goals allowed numbers in the entire league, and yeah, that's just not a recipe for winning. But still, they're only 2 points off the last couple playoff spots. Since they returned home, they've gotten a win and two draws, or a win and a draw at home, and then in the last 4 games they have 5 points, so not horrible. But they aren't scoring as much as they have been, in that early road trip. So it's getting a little concerning. But I think they have the depth here in case they can really sub in a lot of players and not kind of miss a beat. So that's why I have them here. They only dropped one spot for me. And going out of the Sounders, they're up +7 for me. They had a horrible start to the year, kind of a winless start. And then they've kind of picked it up recently. João Paulo has been back, just kind of the crux of that midfield. And yeah, a couple pretty decent results in past weeks. They won against Union in that rescheduled game, and then they did kind of slip up, not getting all the 3 points against kind of a injured Galaxy side, not full strength. But still, 13 goals allowed, 13 goals conceded. They're really average right now, but they have a lot of players that have been in this league for a long time. Even though they're aging, they definitely have the potential to figure it out with Schmetzer in charge and all that. They have the experience. They did miss out on playoffs last year. Obviously, their only year ever. But they, if everyone gets back to healthy and full strength, there's potential to go upwards and make those last couple playoff spots. And going on to Nashville, they've been also horrible at the back this season. They've had a couple injuries, including Zimmerman, but he's back, and I think he got a brace, or at least just one, goal in that thrashing of Montreal this past week. So even though their chance creation and all that isn't as good, if they can tighten things up on the defensive side and kind of get back to that identity, then they definitely have the potential to squeak out, important points and wins against some of the, especially the lower teams in the East. But it is a hotly contested East. It's a stacked conference all around. All the first 9 playoff spots at the moment, should probably be the ones in there. Besides probably New York City for me. Atlanta's out of the top 9, so that's another team that's gonna probably bounce back, you would think. But yeah, they're still just middle of the pack right now. They're not like awful, but not showing me a lot so far. And then Dynamo down 5 spots for me. Kind of a similar case to Dallas, like we mentioned. Only 9 goals this season. That's second worst in the entire league, but they've only let up 10. I really like this roster, on paper, but they don't have a good striker. They need to go out and make a signing because the midfield's really set. I like, they want to possess the ball a lot and link up and pass you to death and all that and break you down. But something's just not been clicking, and especially like last year, they're not scoring as much and been as dominant at home as well. But if they do go out and make that signing, man, this could be a really good team. And even though it's been not the best start, they've kind of overperformed for my expectations at least, and they're in the 8th spot, so in the standings. And then St. Louis just above them. They've had 7 draws this year, which is most in the entire league. So they're not losing. They only have 1 loss actually, but they're not taking advantage of getting all these 3 points. So once again, they're also just hanging around. And I also really like this roster as well. They're one of the best pressing teams in the league, which definitely causes problems for a lot of these teams. And in a wide open West like this, I definitely think they're going to make the playoffs. Some of these teams that are above them, I think, will slip up. And yeah, they have a positive goal differential right now, and they should bounce back. I think, especially at home, they have one of the best atmospheres at home, and yeah, I think they just have the type of roster and the type of players, especially when players like Lowen get healthy, to really cause some more damage and be back towards the top of the West. So these 3 teams have had some of the most surprising swings to me in the entire league so far, since the first couple 5 games of the season. First off, New York City +9 in my rankings. They've really turned it around, but I think I'm not going to really overreact here, but they, credit where credit is due so far. They're up to 7th in the East. They had I think it was 5 or 6 games in a row at home, and they won 3 of those, or 3 of their last 5 at home. They got 10 out of 15 points in their last 5 at home, but they just slipped up to Rapids. So they took advantage of that homestand, I would say, and that's what you have to do in MLS. Where winning on the road is certainly not most teams' strong suits. But still, I don't really, I don't see this team as the season goes on, when you get more and more of a back and forth schedule, keeping up with this pace at all. The roster is still, pretty weak to me. Cushing is not a great coach, and yeah, but so far they're treading in those last couple playoff spots. But teams like Atlanta and other teams will be on their tail. And it's a really stacked East right now. So I have to see more from this team in this middle stretch to be convinced. But they just lost to probably one of their more tougher opponents during this entire stretch, which was Rapids. They lost 2-0, and then their even more tougher opponent than that, they didn't pick up the 3 points against at home, which was Atlanta United 1-1 draw. So, they beat the Revs, they beat Charlotte, and they beat DC. DC probably being the best one out of those 3, but yeah, on the road I think is going to be a whole different story. And yeah, same thing with this Austin side, 16th spot for me, +8. I don't know how they're pulling out these results at all, because I don't like this roster at all. I don't like their identity on the road. They've been really poor. They somehow survived to pick up a point against the Whitecaps just this past week. But it's also a really bad West, so you never know. They could probably they could probably fight for those last couple of spots. But I'm also taking this with a grain of salt and not really overreacting to this. But they've definitely pushed themselves higher up in the power rankings because of the recent stretch. 3 wins in their last 5, and just drew to the Whitecaps, like I said, and some pretty big road results, to be honest. So against some rivals as well in Texas. So still not convinced though, but they've had a really surprising bounce back from the first 5 or 6 games in these past 5 or 6 games. So moving on to Atlanta, down 11. They're out of the playoff spots so far. They're winless in their last 5, 2 losses, and they've, especially at home, they've just been abysmal. I mean, it all started, I think they got a big point against NYCFC. But then coming back home, where they started the season, I think 3 wins for 3, choked to a lead to Philly late because they're kind of being naive, to be honest. Like they're trying to add on to these leads really late when they should be kind of playing less risky, and they're exposing themselves a lot more than they should be. And then they lost 1-2 at home to Cincy. They couldn't score against the Fire on the road, who they beat 3-0 earlier in the season at home. And the Fire, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. And then they lost again at home to Minnesota United, who I've obviously been one of the top teams in the West, but still, after starting 3-0 at home, and not getting a win in your last three at home, that's a really bad sign. They've had a couple injuries. Gregerson's been kind of in and out, and Giacomakis was out for a couple games there, but they really need to pick it up here because they should be probably one of the top four teams in the East. And things aren't looking so good right now, but they definitely have the talent. They definitely have the DPs and all that to obviously turn this around in the middle stretch. And yeah, I don't expect them to be struggling like this for that long. So this next section, I would call these are teams who are comfortable with their identities. And starting with Charlotte, they're up +1 from a month ago in 14th. And yeah, they're just really really solid at home. They're holding teams to clean sheets a lot, like we've talked about on the show previously. And they just got another 2-0 win against Timbers at home. But on the road, they're it's a completely different story. They only have 1 point through 5 road games, so they're really hanging on because of their home form, and they need to kind of just pick it up and just start getting some sort of points on the road, because they could be higher. But yeah, they have a solid roster front to back, but it's not like special to be any higher. And we were seeing that through these road performances. And actually, the news broke today that Copetti's leaving, supposedly for some Argentinian side. That the team is not confirmed that, but that he should be leaving. So they might sign a replacement, and we'll see how they look with that change. But yeah, there's still a lot to be in the balance for this team. But right now they're in a solid spot as long as they can continue getting 3 points time and time again at home. And then moving on to DC, they're down a couple spots for me. They've been also kind of one of those teams that have been back and forth and had a couple like really as a neutral like entertaining games. But this attack is just solid. I like their wingback play, the way they're committed to feeding Benteke, and that's just at least they understand that. But they've kind of had some injury trouble with some of their midfielders like Kudu Pietro, Click. They've been kind of in and out a little bit. So they definitely have the firepower to contend in these playoff spots. And they're not losing many games. They've only lost three wins and 5 draws. But yeah, they've had impressive results, but also had scratching results. Before they lost to NYCFC, they were unbeaten on the road. So their road return has been good as well. Kind of maybe just need to clean it up on the defensive end a bit, but so far, I'd say they're hanging around, and they have the attack to damage anyone in the East. And then moving on to LAFC, actually they're up +5 from a month ago. They did just lose to San Jose, got thrashed by the worst team in the West, but their home form can't be denied. Before that, they had won two. They had one against Timbers. They won against Galaxy and El Tráfico, and then they got 2 pretty good ties, I would say, against Timbers on the road, and then at home to Red Bulls, who are known to be really good defensively. But that was a 2-2 result. So 4 wins, 3 draws, and 4 losses on the year. And yeah, they're hanging around in 7th in the West right now. And yeah, I think this offense is going to be perfectly fine. And probably towards the end of this middle stretch, and then towards that late stretch, obviously Giroud's going to be coming in. So it's going to be a completely different team, and they're already it's not like the offenses have been bad, so they should be comfortably hanging around at 6th or above in the playoff spots. The defense has been pretty impressive so far as well, in that top third or so of expected goals allowed. So there's still a lot of good things to come for LAFC. And then moving on to the Union, they've dropped 4 spots for me. They started off the season. They were the last team to be undefeated in the league while kind of balancing Champions Cup, even though they kind of took an earlier exit. But since they took their first loss to Salt Lake, they lost 2 in a row at home. One of those being Salt Lake, and then the other one Sounders in that rescheduled game. And then, to their credit, they came back against DC United to tie 2-2. So they're hanging around at 8th in the playoff spots, but they definitely do have to be pulling off more wins to jump up in a really stacked East right now. That where Miami, Cincy, Red Bulls, Crew, like those are probably your top 4 dogs in the East right now. So if they want to have some sort of home field advantage, they these draws need to be turning into wins. And yeah, they definitely have the firepower to do that and the system to do that. They're comfortable with how they play. under curtain. So I think positive things are coming for sure, but yeah, not a huge drop for them. And for Toronto, they were 12th in my previous rankings. Now they're up to 10. Uh, they've won three in a row on the bounce. Um, they beat Revs, which they took care of business there, so not a really impressive win. But then they came back to beat Orlando City on the road 2-1, and then they just thrashed Dallas again 3-1. So they started really good on the year, especially defensively, and then they had a couple really bad results to Whitecaps and Charlotte on the road, and we were kind of questioning things about was this kind of a facade and just a fake really good start, but they've really cleaned it up. They have played some sort of weaker teams in terms of where the rankings are right now, so I don't want to overreact. I mean, they're third in the East, but yeah, they're not playing around when it comes to playing these weaker teams, so they deserve to be where they are right now. Insigne has still been out. Bernadeschi's been kind of carrying the load more, and yeah, but I think they're definitely going to drop off a little bit. But right now they deserve to be where they are, and it's been a really solid showing. They only have 14 goals allowed on the year, which isn't bad. So, um, and then moving on to Rapids, they're up 7. They just got, as we said, an impressive win against NYCFC. They were kind of back and forth to start the year, but they have 3 wins in the last 5, including a draw to Miami on the road. They beat Earthquakes on the road. They beat Dallas at home, and then NYCFC. And then just before that, they lost to Cincy 2-1. So they're 5th in the West right now. They have a really high expected goal output, and their defense isn't bad either. And even without Mihailovic against NYCFC, they dominated that game, and Navarro's been looking really, really solid for them as their number 9. So in a West that's not as stacked, I think they've definitely separated themselves so far, and especially with the home advantage they have just in general, this middle of the stretch can be very promising for them. So here we got the sleeping or wounded Giants category, because I think these are two of definitely the top teams in the East. But starting with Red Bull, they're down a couple spots just because of a couple of their recent games. Obviously, the big one being just getting absolutely bounced by Miami 6-2. Messi with just an absolute masterclass. So that's definitely going to take a hit to their morale. But that was kind of a big statement win for Miami to kind of put themselves at the top of the East, and that's just what they're gonna do all season as long as everyone's healthy and focused on the league now. But Red Bulls obviously still a solid team. They just kind of they have some sort of problem with these red cards. Two of them in their last 2 home games against the Fire and Whitecaps, but they've been picking up draws, so they've been picking up points regardless of those red cards. So, defensively, they know how to really get compact and pull out some results when things are looking more dire than they should be. But they're still 4th in the East. And yeah, I'm not really worried about this team at all. But, just their couple past recent results have been some head scratchers. And, but yeah, nothing too much to worry about with this team. And then moving on to Columbus, they're down 4 spots, but, it's kind of, honestly, it's not their fault. I mean, they have 5 draws in a row, while they've been balancing this insane Champions Cup run where they're in the final now against Pachuca in about a month. And yeah, so 5 draws in a row isn't great, isn't horrible, but honestly, they probably shouldn't even be falling, this many spots. But because balancing it and not even losing in this entire stretch is just insane in itself, because we haven't really seen this out of a team. And they're still finding a way to balance it and pull out results. So real credit to them. And now they're still 5th in the East. They've only lost 1 game, and we know they're definitely the best team in MLS besides Miami. And now they have a month before that Champions Cup final, so they can really focus on the league for this short stretch in these 4 or 5 games before that. And I expect them to come out full force, obviously, and have a full strength lineup every game, as kind of preparation for that final as well. And so yeah, they're still sitting comfortably in these power rankings, and by the time we make the next one, they might be even higher because they've just been kind of on a back seat, but they've survived this stretch. And man, look out! The rest of the league really needs to look out. Moving on to what I believe are some really solid playoff squads and should be in the top half and hosting probably home games um, in the playoffs as it looks right now. Starting with Vancouver, they're up 2 spots for me from about a month ago. They just tied to Austin at home, which wasn't the greatest results, but they had 2 goals taken off, or 1 goal taken off, and a penalty that uh, was kind of 50-50. But yeah, they definitely had some situations go against them. But anyways, this is a really solid defensive team, and they only have 10 goals conceded throughout this whole season. They've done the business against these decent teams. I mean, they went on the road and got a result against Red Bulls. Their only losses were to Salt Lake and Galaxy, who are just barely above them in the standings. But besides that, they have a really solid lineup. White and Gold are leading the way, and yeah, as weak as this West is and inconsistent, they definitely know how to they've established themselves and separated themselves. And then moving on to Galaxy, they started off obviously super, super hot. They've cooled off a little bit simply because of some injuries and some suspensions to Puig and Jovic. And this attack is super high powered, but without Jovic, I think Miguel Berry is definitely not as good of an option whatsoever. And if Jovic can't stay healthy, it's going to be interesting to see how this team adapts to that because they still have super good wingers. But if their problem is obviously the crux is their defense, and that's going to be an Achilles heel if they can't fix that. But they did just get a big result on the road, 0-0 against Sounders, so they've kind of weathered that type of that small storm. But just if Jovic's injury isn't have him out too long, then they should remain fine. They've only dropped a couple spots here from being top for me, number one from last month. But yeah, if they can clean up these issues in the back, then they should be perfectly fine. But I think this is another one of those teams that they're just praying to outscore everybody, but they need to be healthy, to be able to hang in games because we've seen instances now where when they get behind early and they have to break these teams down, it definitely is not the way they want to play. They love playing on the counter as well. So, moving on to Cincinnati, they're down a couple spots, but honestly, that's not even a discredit to them. It's just about how good these other teams above them have been doing. They have 3 wins in a row now. They won at Atlanta, they beat the Rapids, and now they won on the road against Orlando. They've been really solid on the road, but I think they've been playing some of these weaker teams, but once again they stick to their identity. On the defensive side, they have only 9 goals conceded, which is tied for best in the league right now. Salentano's been just a brick wall in goal, and yeah, Acosta's kind of carrying this team through the motions with Bupenza now with an injury. And yeah, even though their striker options aren't the best, the system works for them, and Acosta just pulls the strings. So they're second in the East right now, only 3 points behind Miami. But moving ahead to these teams above them, this is why they fell a couple spots. So moving on to Minnesota, I mean, man, they start off really hot, and they've continued it. 3 wins in a row as well. They beat Atlanta on the road. Before that, they beat Kansas City, who has been horrible, obviously, and then they just bounced Charlotte, who was on a huge home unbeaten run, 3-0. They're only 1 point behind RSL, the team above them in these power rankings. They're only 1 point behind them in the standings, and yeah, they looked really impressive in this new system. They've kind of had some squad rotation, especially with their striker options, and everyone's fitting in, and they're flying high right now, especially at home. They've really been solid, and yeah, it's only up from here. I mean, these top 4 teams in the West right now, I think, should remain. They've been the most consistent. They have the most balance in their squads, I think, and most firepower. So, moving on to RSL, they just edge out Minnesota. They moved up 7 in my rankings from a month ago. They're number 1 in the West now. 3 3 wins and 2 draws in the last 5. They tied Minnesota on the road, tied Crew at home, and then 4-0 at Fire, 2-1 to Union, and then 1-0 to at home to Kansas City. So Chicho Arango is making a really strong, kind of honorable mention MVP case, because we're gonna get to who is obviously MVP. But yeah, he's been carrying this team. The only issue is if he goes down, then it's gonna be really interesting to see how this team adapts, because they have a lot of young pieces that I think he is really pulling together and leading strongly right now. So real credit to them. Their defensive numbers are outstanding as well. Only 9 goals allowed, and they have a really strong home field advantage as one of those higher altitude West teams. So this should continue as long as Arango's healthy, and even without him, their defense is solid enough to pull out points from bad positions. So real credit to them, and I'm looking forward to all 5 of these teams, how they continue this middle stretch, because they've definitely impressed so far and they have strong foundations. I mean, was it ever even a doubt here? Number 1 spot goes to Inter Miami, who's up +10 from about a month ago when they were still in Champions Cup and kind of getting some really poor results to some below average teams. But yeah, they've just been killing it lately ever since they got bounced out by Monterrey. Full focus on the league. 4 wins in a row since then. At Kansas City, against Nashville, at Revolution, and then a 6-2 statement win against Red Bulls with Messi, 5 assists. Just unbelievable. Now that they're committed to the league, it's going to be really scary for all these teams. I mean, the 3 wins before that were against 3 really poor teams, that we've mentioned. But this last one was a huge win. They put any conversations about who's the top dog in the East kind of to bed for now, because Red Bulls thrashed them 4-0 in that reverse fixture earlier in the season. So got the revenge there, and Messi's pulling his strings. Suarez is getting his goal contributions. As long as everyone stays healthy, they're just having fun out there. Even if they go behind, they get it right back. They're relentless, and yeah, I don't see anyone but Crew right now kind of stopping this team when they're both at full strength. So credit to this team, and yeah, it's just been amazing to watch as a fan. But I'm really excited to see what else happens as down the line. This middle stretch should be just as good for them. And with Leagues Cup coming up, kind of, I think probably towards the end of this middle stretch, we're gonna see how this team kind of adjusts to that schedule fluctuation once again. But for now, they should be set to kind of run the table and separate themselves even more for this supporter shield. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'm really excited to have gotten this series going with the power rankings and get the first one out of the way. I think I'm really excited to kind of probably plan to do this monthly or so as we come along in this season during the summer months. And we're going to learn a lot about these teams in this middle stretch. A lot of things can go right and a lot of things can go wrong, and we're going to see if some of these teams are for real or not. If some of them can maintain probably some of these sort of surprising forms for those that we talked about. And yeah, just let me know what you agree with, what you disagree with, and if you're a fan of one of these teams, if you think you have some potential from these maybe bad starts or good starts, and what you see changing or staying the same. And yeah, so thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.